We are recording.
Sweet. That's wonderful. Ian is a co-host now. Awesome. All right. I'll give it one more minute and then we'll get rolling. Let's see everyone who's here. We have Ed and Jim and Patrick and Hamza and Navneet and Ian. Awesome. That's fantastic. Who is R? Hey, Hamza. Okay, let's get rolling. So we have a lot to cover. Let's see. First things, just to make sure that everyone understands things that we've said in the Slack channel. We have now officially executed a letter with council. So RChain Co-op is being the articles of incorporation are being filed, which means the bylaws drafted will be a part of that filing. So if you have any thoughts or comments on those, please get those in soon. Likewise, we have engaged Vulcanize officially. Hey, Andrew, good to see you. Likewise, we've engaged Vulcanize to help with the redemption process. So that's well underway. Hey, Rakesh, thanks for joining. Let's see, what else is there to talk about? So we now have an updated version of the architecture document. We also have an updated version of the sort of the technical details that connect all the dots, so people don't have to be worried or mystified at all. If you want to read the mobile process for programming the blockchain, I've made sure that all of the major dots are connected, so that people can have an assessment of the architecture and the technology for themselves, and exactly why the choices were made that were made. And people should understand that this is really the result of over 30 years worth of work, and by lots of people, most of them much smarter than I am. So it's I'm quite delighted to be bringing this to fruition, and I'm very grateful for all the people who are jumping in to make it work. We also will be having a dev stand-up at 12, so I have to jump off this call right at 12. We have Matthew DeFerrante and David Curran, and Andrew Watson and Ed Eichholt and Navneet and myself will be a part of the dev stand-up, and so we're back to parity with where we were before. we now have the same number of developers working on the process as we did before the little minor blip in the road that happened recently. So that's very good news, and it makes me excited because now we have people who are in it because for reasons of alignment of values more than anything else. And I think that's what makes projects actually work, is alignment of values. So that's all good news. I want to spend some time today talking about some of the technical questions that came up, and also go over the terms and conditions. So we're another thing that Evan will be looking at is taking this draft terms and conditions document and making it a little bit more solid from a legal perspective. But I'll go ahead and share that with people. So these are the terms and conditions that draft. that people can take a look at. And so here we go. Again, that's a draft. That's not the official legal document, but that's where we are. And then also, in addition to the terms and conditions, here's the next iteration of the basic redemption description, redemption process description and mechanism. I'll go ahead and share that now. So that goes here. So the timeline is spelled out in the V2 document that I just posted. So it's a 10-day process. We will announce the commencement of that date at a later time. We still have some technical details to work out. There'll be a draft of the user flow, sort of the user experience flow for people who are participating in the redemption. Ed, do you feel comfortable sharing that draft at this point? Because we can just go ahead and share that now, if you feel comfortable.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the question. Share draft of what?
So you and Navneet and others have sort of sketched out a flow for the user experience. If you feel comfortable sharing now,
I am, but I'm on the phone. Navneet, do you have access to that, Andy?
Unfortunately not.
Or Greg, if you want to share it.
Let's see.
If the word draft isn't on the top of it, it should be.
Okay, let me take a look. Is this? That's not it.
Did you share a link, Greg? I don't see it.
They're in the. I've shared 3 links so far, and those are all. Here we go. I've got the draft. One second.
I'm actually going to hang up, but I'm right next to Navneet, so I'm still on the call.
Okay. So here's the link of that. So they're all. I see.
In the chat.
I see what's going on. When someone messaged me and it changed the it changed the status. Okay, so let me read. Sorry, let me redo that. That's a bad UI design. Okay, so there's the first link, which is the T's and C's. That's mostly just legalese stuff. There's the second link, which is the aims of the aims and mechanism of the process, and then here's the third link, which is the user UX flow. Here we go. Okay, good. So what I've tried to do is collect all the feedback from all the community, and especially talk through all of the issues with respect to economic abstraction with Vlad. We're still engaged in that conversation, but because that conversation is still open, the RCoin B and RCoin E conversions, we're going to hold off on until some later date. And depending upon the outcome of those conversations about economic abstraction. I see. Is that private? I thought I had given a link for everyone. Oh, I see what happened. It's anyone at Lively Gig, right? I see. Hang on.
Hey, this is Navneet. Ed is working on it. He's just trying to fix it.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So the economic abstraction discussion is still outstanding. So the direct conversions from BTC or redemption of BTC and Ether is going to be held off until we have concluded all of those conversations. So the only only redemption process that we'll be supporting, and this is kind of important also from a engineering perspective. We want to get these, we want to do one of them and do it right first. So the RChain, so the AMP redemption process is the first one we'll offer. We'll get that right, and then under the assumptions that we have successful conclusion of the economic abstraction conversation, which is still an open question, then we will offer the other conversions, direct conversions or redemptions to the chain. I've talked with many people about price points and all of that, and I've come to the conclusion that the best we can do for everyone is simply one for one. It's RChain for AMP. I know that many people had sold their amps at the when all the trouble hit, and they can buy them back at a discount price at this point. So I think that should be to their advantage if they want to go that route. I don't know how to make it fair in a way that meets all of the constituents involved, and I think that a lot of the inconvenience there has to do with the people making decisions that were completely out of my control. So if there is any additional relief that people need to seek with respect to fairness, well, there are other parties involved. You know who they are. You know how to contact them. So you know how to seek relief from that process. So from my point of view, I do understand that there are lots and lots of folks who have irons in the fire here and are stakeholders, but I think the best way to make people whole is simply one for one, RChain for AMP.
Now, I was arguing for a 30-day redemption period. Maybe you can say why 10 days was selected. Yes,
we need to make this long enough for people to get the message, but tight enough so that we can make progress. So, in particular, the investment from Auto Capital it won't begin. We won't close until after the redemption process is closed. So that holds out, that makes that process take longer. So don't want to do that. And then speaking of which, as we've said before, we have no intention of either burning the amps that are collected or crashing the amp market any further than it's crashed. We're simply interested in making sure that people are whole, and so the amps will be auctioned off in a manner that is reasonable and fair. The coins that are minted will be initially exactly those equivalent to the total number of amps that were available both in reserve and in circulation as of the 12th of December 2016. We will make available for redemption exactly the amount of amps that have been in circulation as of the 12th of December 2016. Whatever percentage is converted, that percentage of the coins held in reserve will remain in reserve, and everything else will be burned. This way, it will be clear that whatever position you have in RChain is exactly the same position as you have in amps. So I can't imagine why someone would think that that's not fair. I think that's as fair as we can possibly do. And again, if you're seeking additional relief, I didn't create the mess here. I'm just trying to clean it up.
Do they have any idea when the process might begin?
Yes, it's going to happen very, very soon now. We're just in the midst of nailing down all of the technical details that have to do all of the technical details that have to do with burdening the AMP treasury and making sure that there's a fair swap. Hang on one second, guys. Sorry about that. But my partner is about to leave, and I wanted to give her a goodbye kiss. So there are a few technical details that we are ironing out with Vulkan, and as soon as those are done, we will commence the process. Right. So this is really just a matter of days. We're trying to get all of this done as quick as possible. Part of this is made a little bit more complex because we're switching networks. Right. We're going from the Bitcoin network to the Ethereum network. So that's part of the technical details. There are a lot of things on the Omni layer above the Bitcoin network that, just don't exist and make it harder to, that are available on the Ethereum network. So that also presents some technical challenges that we're getting around. Any other questions? Let's see, what have we got in the chat? So I understand T has some concerns about auto, and we can talk about that subsequently, but that's really independent of the redemption process in a certain sense. All we know is that we're going to close this out first, and then we'll talk. Then we'll have, once we have the co-op articles filed, then we can name directors, and once we have that, then we can complete the negotiations with Auto Capital.
Now,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. There was talk about, I guess, awarding AMP bounties for certain co-op projects. Is that no longer in the plans?
No, I think that's a great, not AMP bounties. I'm not interested in AMP bounties. I'm not going to be tied to. Oh, I see. With respect to that's a possibility. Yeah, I see. You saying from the AMPs that are collected from the. I understand. I understand the issue. Just to summarize your position and make sure I've heard you. After the conversion process, RChain will have a certain number of AMPs. And the question is, should we be able to use those as bounties to have community members execute on tasks on behalf of the co-op? My personal feeling, again, this is just my feeling, the co-op membership will have to decide this. But my personal feeling is I'd rather not do that. If we're going to do bounties, I'd prefer them to be in RCoin rather than in AMPs, and just simply get the AMPs, out of the hands of the co-op in a disciplined and reasonable manner for all concerned, right? So essentially, what we're trying to do is to bifurcate the projects so they're not tied at the hip. And so we're trying to do that in a disciplined and reasonable fashion. So bounties for community-based engagement, I think, should be in RCoin A, unless the co-op membership decides otherwise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I have arguments on that side, but we can handle those afterwards.
Yeah, agreed. So my opinion is that RChain Co-op or RChain should not comment on or encourage listing on exchange. Yes, I tend to agree. Actually, we have four arguments against the idea that the RCoin is a security. So I'm feeling quite and the access to my founder's wallet again. This is like the least of my concerns. I mean, I know that many people are concerned about this, but I never ever counted on AMPs being worth anything. I always counted on focusing on the tech and delivering value to people via the tech, and I made a promise not to touch my AMPs until such time as the RChain was operational. And I made that promise months ago, and I made it in public on video. So I will keep that promise. If we are able to successfully negotiate the transfer of those AMPs, I will make them available at least in part to support the RChain cooperative opportunity. That's where my aims and goals are. So. Again, I'm not trying to double anything. I'm not necessarily. I've been thinking a lot about whether or not there are founders R coins, and I'm actually quite averse to that idea. But I need to talk it over with all of the people who are spending a lot of time and helping to get our co-op set up. I want to be fair to all the people that are involved in that effort. But the reality is, I'm not interested in having some giant stockpile of our coin. I'm not in this for the money. I don't know how many times I have to say this. I'm interested in getting the tech delivered because we're at a critical point where we need the tech in order to coordinate ourselves for a much bigger problem. That's where my focus is, and I hope people can come to share with me that focus. That numero uno, we want to make sure that this network operates in the way that we envision it operating, and that we utilize it to serve this other purpose, which is to begin to coordinate ourselves. So, like, I'm viewing this period as a period of practice. Can we learn to work together? It's really that simple. Can we learn to utilize all of our weaknesses as stepping stones towards a much healthier way of working together, right? All of the selfishness and the doubt and the mistrust. Can we find a way to utilize that to work in a manner in which we are effective and begin to practice trust and begin to practice good communication and effective operation and focus and delivery, right? And if we can practice those things here and now in the creation of this network and platform, then we will have enough experience under our belts so that we can coordinate ourselves towards the much larger issue of climate change. Right, so it's like a little, the building out of this network is like a little tiny, crucible. It's a little laboratory. Can we learn as a community how to work together effectively, so that when we come to the real problems, I mean, these are toy problems, by comparison to what we're actually going to face in the next a decade or so. And so we have to we first practice on these little toy problems, and then once we've learned to trust each other enough, and we've become a real community that knows how to get stuff done, then we can start focusing on the issues that we're going to be facing down the pipeline. And so I hope people understand that that's the way I'm thinking about this. I'm not in this to get rich. Not interested in that. I'm in this to make sure that my children have a fighting chance with respect to the kinds of changes that are going to be happening as a result of the way we've treated the planet. That's my focus after or in part of delivering the tech. Okay, so speaking of which, I would love to talk a little bit about the tech itself and where we are with all of that. So I before moving on to the tech, apparently there are some additional questions about the mechanism. So yes, we have decided, unless there is really, really vocal opposition to this, the decision is to go with the Ethereum network for the RCoin A token. So that's actually listed in the document in case people want to read it. We will be minting the coin in the next couple of days, so that people will be able to see the wallet with the RCoin A that's held as a part of the process of part of the redemption process. So we'll make that available, the information about that available on announcements in the RChain Slack channel. We will be using an ERC20 contract, so people can look that up and evaluate that for themselves. Rick Dudley and Adam Silowitz's firm Vulcanize, we have engaged them to help us with the process of minting the coin and overseeing the redemption process. So we have essentially a neutral third party who will help with this and make sure that everything is done correctly. So hopefully that answers the question of Ethereum versus Omni asset. But that's what makes the redemption process a little bit more complex, because we're shifting from an Omni asset to an Ethereum asset. If we had initially gone with Ethereum, that would have been slightly better, because the Ethereum network has essentially more capabilities. And it would have been a lot easier to do these kinds of things. And that's why I'm really glad that we're shifting over to the Ethereum network for this intermediate token until RChain is live and operational. Okay, any other questions regarding the redemption process before we move on to some tech talk, which is what I like to talk about? Sweet. Silence is golden. So Navneet, you had questions about the virtual machine, and I would love to field those now, because that's probably some of the most interesting conversation we can have. It opens up questions about sharding. It opens up questions about namespace, and lots of other things as well. So if you wanted to drive with some of those questions, I'd love to spend some time on that.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was just thinking, where to start. I mean, I think
begin anywhere. Begin in the middle. Begin at the end. I don't care. Let's just have the conversation. I think it's much more interesting and more fun.
Right. So, some of the questions I have, primarily from the roadmap point of view, right? So I think you mentioned, a few Hangouts back that currently we are going to use that VM and then eventually convert to completely Roland VM.
So wait. Let me correct that immediately. So there's the architecture document as it stands. Hang on a second. I'm going to find that. Hey, does anybody have the read the docs link for the architecture document? Because David Curran did some great work reformatting this under the read the docs thing, and it looks so beautiful. Ed, Navneet, do either of you, or David, do you have that link? I'm missing it right now. If you can post it in the chat. Did it get posted? There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. It got and now let's see. Where's the row VM? Here it is. I think it's this one. Okay, cool. All right. So I've got that. Now let me go to screen share, and we can talk through exactly the point you just made in terms of the architecture document. I don't know if this is big enough, and for whatever reason, it's not allowing me to do there we go. Okay, hopefully that's big enough for people to see. Okay, so initially we had done our due diligence, and the thinking was to go to LLVM. And then after I did a second, so as the final target for the bytecode, and I had, there are lots of reasons to go this route. Not the least of which is because there's a path from the Zinc machine, which is the sort of speedy little thing that's sitting underneath the recent implementations of OCaml, that's been formally verified down to LLVM. So that's a strong reason to do that. However, OCaml is not concurrent. OCaml is a functional language, therefore it's based on the lambda calculus, and therefore the mapping from through a lambda intermediate representation to LLVM makes a lot of sense, because LLVM doesn't have a well-documented concurrency infrastructure. The surface for concurrency is mysterious, black magic, and it's a social process for learning how to do that. So I'm kind of, since we're all about correct by construction architectures, that's like the least useful thing. It just doesn't fit with our development methodology. So the question is, what can we use as the final VM target to get us down to the metal? And it turns out that if we stop here at delimited continuations, there's a natural map to the Rosette VM. So just to be super clear about all of this, RoVM only ever exists as an IR. It doesn't exist as a in terms of a reduction table. That reduction table is realized in terms of the final target, and you have a series of transformations from each kind of IR down to the target in such a way that you can prove that the transitions that would exist in the RoVM are perfectly mirrored down here. Right? That's what it means to be correct by construction. The transition that would exist at this VM level is perfectly mirrored down here, but we're now going to replace this piece of the puzzle with the Rosette VM. So does that make sense, Navneet? Did you understand what I said?
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, okay, cool.
So is this delimited continuation going to be part of the existing implementation also?
Yes, but not delimited continuations in the sense of the package that is supplied by Scala.
Right.
Okay, so that's critical because that's the reason we decided to go down this path. So we had a technical debt that had to do with the Scala delimited continuations library. It didn't perform in the manner that was advertised at the time that I took it on as a dependency. And we worked around and lived with the limitations for several years. And then the Scala community, rather than improving it, decided to abandon it. And so that left many projects in the lurch. Over a dozen projects were left in the lurch, including Special K. So one of the approaches to solving the problem would have been to take over the delimited continuations library and redo it. So that's one approach. The other approach is to begin from a platform where the continuations already exist as first-class citizens. Guess what? That's the case in the Rosette VM. That is exactly how the Rosette VM was constructed since the early 90s. And in point of fact, as I tried to make clear in the mobile process for programming the blockchain, that's what gave rise to the whole architecture for realizing the pi calculus as a distributed programming model. Is precisely because we had a first-class VM that supported first-class continuations in the presence of concurrency. So we worked at all of that out in advance. And then we realized the tuple space model on top of that. And then I realized the pi calculus model on top of the tuple space model. And those basic ideas fed into the design and implementation and deployment of Microsoft's BizTalk. However, Microsoft lost the thread and treated it as a centralized technology. So at a certain point, it was very clear that we were never going to get to a decentralized technology. And at that point, I left to go develop other markets. Now that decentralization is back in the center of people's attention, the decentralized technology that we were working on with Rosette in the early to mid 90s now makes more sense. So we can take that VM, and by the way, the Rosette VM, just so people are aware, the Rosette VM was utilized to build ATM network management systems for Sumitomo and TSB. It was used to build provisioning systems for Ameritech. It was used to build data cleaning systems for Belcor. So we're not talking about a VM that was designed, 6 months, 6 months ago. Hello? Who said, is that Ed?
Yes, it was at just Ed and I were having a little side conversation.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so this is a VM that has been under considerable pressure in the field in industrial scale application for quite some time. All right. So, but we're not going to go as tempting as it is for me. We are not going to go with the C++ implementation. Instead, we will do a clean room implementation of the VM, and I can describe the technical details of how that works. But before we go down there, the important point is the delimited continuations IR maps directly onto the Rosette support for continuations. And I describe exactly that in this document here. So in mobile processes for programming the blockchain, which I have shared with multiple people, but I will share it again here. You can see exactly how the semantics works. So if you go from the pi calculus to tuple spaces, this is the path. And the tuple space semantics is implemented here in 2 pages of Rosette code. So on this page and on this page, you have the core of the means by which you implement tuple space semantics on top of the virtual machine. So this is what's necessary to have as a piece of runtime on top of the virtual machine. So you have the virtual machine primitives together with this piece of runtime, and then you can realize the pi calculus directly on top of that. Right, so this is how we get the delimited continuation functionality that we need. The main difference between this and the delimited continuation functionality that was provided by the Scala implementation of the delimited continuation semantics is the package as a monad. But that kind of packaging is literally just a refactoring of the same piece of code. And I show exactly how that's done right here. So here's the monadic pattern. Let me make this bigger so people can see it. So here's the monadic pattern, and it corresponds precisely to this pattern at the Rosette level. So that's literally just a minor refactoring in order to get that semantics. And then once you have that refactoring, then you can support a wide variety of other semantics, and that's the semantics that are supported in the Roland contracting language. So what I've just done for you is to sketch out how to go from Roland contracting language through the tuple space trampoline down to the Rosette VM. So I just sketched out for you the bottom half of this. Actually, I went from the top all the way down to the bottom of this pipeline. Okay, so long-winded answer, Navneet, but hopefully I've answered that question. So I'm ready to move on to the next questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious how the tuple space mapping exposes, I guess, associative type memory.
It doesn't, right? And that's the important point about being abstract about the tuple space semantics. So you want to represent the tuple space semantics in terms of channels, right? So what constitutes a tuple is what constitutes an in request on a tuple is the channel plus the pattern, and that's how you factor it. And then you are agnostic about what constitutes a channel, and then there are different approaches to different channels. So if the channel is a TCP/IP socket, then you know what to do on the back end of that channel. If the channel is an AMQP provider, then you know what to do with that channel. If the the channel is an object in Java memory, then you know what to do with that channel. So you separate out the binding between the binding between the channel and its semantics from operations across the channel. And you provide enough of the same kind of semantics above that so that it smoothly interoperates. Does that make sense, Jim?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Of course. No, it's a great question. Navneet, you had a question?
Yeah, so, I think we talked a little bit about, transaction versus smart contract in every aspect of, VM interacting with VM. And then I think the second question, the follow-up question would be nested VMs, right?
Yes.
Now let me step back. So I think what you and I were, at least we are discussing about the VM, that defining every transaction as a message versus smart contracts. Can you give me a little bit, or explain the community a little bit more in detail that making smart contract may be a better choice than just simply message transactions?
Well, I mean, message passing versus smart contracts is kind of the name of the game when you move to blockchain, right? So, I mean, there are several questions here that I want to separate out. So, message passing is a programming paradigm that doesn't make any particular commitments to state, right? So I can write a Unix program and you can write a Unix program, and I can write mine in C and you can write yours in Java, and then we can use sockets to pass messages back and forth. So reasoning about that end-to-end application becomes quite complicated, because now I have to include your C program semantics and the Java virtual machine semantics, as well as your Java program semantics, as well as whatever discipline you're supporting in terms of message passing. So the reasoning about that is quite challenging. It's not straightforward. What we do in order to simplify that is we say everybody's running on exactly the same virtual machine, not the same instance of the virtual machine, but the same virtual machine semantics, right? So that in some sense, there's no difference between the Ethereum proposal and this proposal. The differences have to do with which virtual machine and how the virtual machines fit together, which we'll get to in a minute. All right. So once you know that the program you wrote and the program I wrote are running on top of exactly the same virtual machine, then reasoning about the semantics gets dramatically simpler. If, in addition, you know that the state of both programs are, as represented by their execution in the virtual machine, is also stored on a blockchain that enjoys exactly the same storage semantics, then again, reasoning about the end-to-end semantics of that application, even though you wrote your program completely independently from how I wrote my program, that becomes dramatically simpler, right? And then in addition, both of us get to have as an assumption that the state that we're relying on is being replicated by the blockchain. So that also dramatically simplifies the end-to-end reasoning and gives us guarantees about availability. So in the pure message passing situation, your program may go down and I'm up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. I don't even know if you have made any promises or guarantees about when you recover what state you will have squirreled away and recover to. I don't know how to guarantee that in the general message passing situation. But in this blockchain-based world, which is the world of smart contracts, and that's what I was building up to, we have those guarantees. We know exactly what's being stored. We know how the state is being replicated. And in addition, the point of that is that it's replicated in such a way that that bad actors, whether they are governments or gangsters, can't take it down, because someone will always stand up a node if some nodes get taken down. So the point is that the VM is running on a global compute infrastructure. So that means that the contracts essentially can't be taken down. So that's the fundamental differences between those two paradigms, and why the smart contracting as a programming paradigm is so appealing. You get much greater correctness guarantees. It becomes much easier to reason about end-to-end applications, even though they are developed by independent and autonomous parties. And you get much greater availability on your programs. So that's the number one. Those are the sort of high-end or high-order bit reasons for preferring blockchain over anything else. Finally, and probably the most compelling from everyone else, is inside the blockchain as a part of response to denial of service attacks. You use economics. Right, so you use tokens like the RChain token, the RCoin, to make it costly for attackers who are attacking the chain-based VM to take down applications. They have to pay an RCoin token in order to run programs, or either long-running programs or lots of programs or lots of long-running programs. They're paying in order to conduct those denial of service attacks. In the pure message passing framework, there's no built-in economics. There's no agreed upon economic structure that prevents an attacker from DOSing one side of that application or the other. So that's why that's the fourth and final, and in for many people in the community, the most compelling reason why you prefer the blockchain model over everything else.
That's great.
So given that, the question is, what's the relationship of transactions to smart contracts? So in the RChain architecture, what we're saying is that a Roland contract essentially turns into a bunch of executions of what's called the COM rule in the row calculus. It's very similar to the COM rule in the pi calculus. And all it says is, I've got one thread wanting to do some output, I've got another thread wanting to do some input, and then something, i.e. some kind of decision process or scheduler, makes a decision about which input matches which output. And once they are matched, then that's the transaction. And so if we look here, so you can think about that. I mean, that clearly has a nice transactional interpretation. It has, both from a financial point of view and from a computer science point of view, it has a very nice interpretation. So if I bring this up, you can see that it also has a very nice interpretation in terms of the blockchain. So let me just quickly show. So this little structure here, let's see if I can make it even bigger. This little expression here, which is the input, a thread that's blocked on input, right? It's essentially waiting on data from a channel. That data will then be pattern matched against the particular pattern and create variable bindings that will be available to this subcontract after that has happened. And it's not just a single one, but potentially multiple of these I/O events are happening. So what that says is we have a nice, clear transactional semantics, right? So here's the first part of that input construction. And if you think about it, each of these addresses could be, for example, blockchain addresses. So that we're taking strong advantage of the fact that channels can be multiple things, right? There's a polymorphic interpretation for channels. So in this case, we're saying from each of these addresses, we observe these values, or at each of these addresses, we observe those values. And then transactionally, whatever comes after this curly brace is guaranteed only to ever run having observed these things. So this constitutes a transactional boundary for the remainder of the program. Likewise, if that program happens to be another transaction, this constitutes a transactional boundary for the remainder of this sub-program. In this way, the program structure maps directly onto block structure. And it maps in such a way that you know that the program semantics matches exactly the blockchain structure semantics, but it works the other way around. You could represent blockchains using these kinds of programs. So think about that. Well, the representation between the contracting language Rolang is so tightly matching the blockchain semantics that you can go in either direction. You can interpret the programs in terms of the blockchain semantics, or you can represent chains in terms of these programs textually. They are exactly isomorphic. There is no other proposal on the table that has this quality assurance. Nothing comes even close. Now, that's just the beginning, because in addition to this kind of nice tight match between the program semantics and the chain semantics, which is what we want, we have a type system for all the programs written in this way. And that type system allows us to reason about the structure of programs so that we can make guarantees of the program's execution. Right? So the most important example is one that we wrote about in April or May of this year. Sorry. Which is that we showed that if you were to write the DAO contracts as Rolang contracts, then the bug is represented as a race condition. And if you write down the type that the contract should have been respecting, then the erroneous program would not have type checked using the type systems that we have here. And so we would have caught at compile time the problem that the DAO contract exhibited that allowed $50 million odd to be drained out of the contract. So the DAO contract would never have been deployed because the compiler would have caught it and said, your contract doesn't compile correctly because it doesn't match the type you declared for the contract. And that arises because we have all of these pieces fitting together in just a certain way, right? There's the tight semantics between the programs and the transactional interpretation, and there's the tight semantics between the programs and their types. And this is what allows us to give extremely strong guarantees to end-to-end contracts or applications that are built out of contracts that are developed by autonomous parties. So I write a contract, Vulcanize writes a contract, LivelyGig writes a contract, and then someone comes along and builds a higher end contract with a value add proposition by stitching together all of those contracts. And they are able to prove the correctness of their contracts, right? Even though all of the pieces were written autonomously and independently. This is unprecedented in internet applications. There's no other environment that offers this kind of proposal. So I just want people to be aware of what we're talking about here and why the proposal has such a value proposition, right? Yeah. So just correctness alone. We haven't talked about the improvements in performance and throughput. We've just talked about correctness.
Yeah, some people have been arguing that, other systems will have this proof of correctness that we're talking about here. But the thing that I think distinguishes this is actually not only detectable at runtime, but at compile time, but the behavior is enforced at runtime.
That's correct. That's correct. The behavior that gets deployed at runtime will have passed the compile time checks. So that's exactly right. So that's why it's critically important to understand the value proposition of having semantics at this level. In other words, all the pieces fit together in in a very specific way. And if there are other systems that have this level of integration and correctness, I'm all ears. Show them, demonstrate them to me. I'm wide open here. From my point of view, we're building a replacement financial infrastructure. In order to do that and have people actually trust it, you have to have these kinds of guarantees, and they have to be provable, right? Otherwise, you run into problems like the DAO. I mean, I completely laud the courage and the adventurousness of the Ethereum network. I think without that kind of courage and adventurousness, we won't make progress. Innovation happens because people take risk. And what this does is to build upon that courage by adding in the safeguards that make taking that risk realistic. All right, so that's part of the value prop here. The other value prop has to do with the way we do the consensus technology, which and again, the consensus technology is primarily about, or at least initially about, replication and availability of state, right? So that it doesn't cost the energy supply of the nation state of Ireland to maintain a 2 transactions per second throughput rate, right? We can't have that, right? So that's part of the reason for Casper. And then the other thing is that we have to be able to capitalize on having having a block size, basically completely avoiding the block size debate. Block size is not the issue. The issue is whether or not the blocks in the transactions in a block are mutually consistent, right? And so that's the bet by proposition approach. It's not about how many transactions you fit in a block. You could have millions of transactions in a block as long as they are mutually consistent, and you have a proof that they are mutually consistent and that everyone has agreed upon exactly the constraints for fitting those transactions together. Once you have that, then you can have massive throughput rates, right? And that's the other piece of the puzzle here. Okay, so I've been talking forever. I really apologize for just droning on here. There are 4 minutes left before I have to jump over to stand up. Anybody have any burning questions?
Yeah, can you come on?
Hey, this is Ed. Yeah, I just want to put in a plug that about the director nomination for the RChain co-op. We're thinking about 5 or 7 directors initially, and then growing perhaps to many directors over that. They would be on a probably 3, 4, 5 month kind of initial term. You join on the co-op channel on Slack. You feel free to just nominate somebody there, but I'll probably also create a Google form, so we can collect names as well. So any comments about what I've said?
Yes, I want to amplify what you said, Ed. One of the things that we've been discussing, you and I privately, along with others, is that my feeling that those projects that participate in the incubator, part of the tax of participating in the incubator is that they have to pony up a director for RChain Co-op for the duration that they are an incubator project. So, for example, I've been thinking quite seriously about having making a proposal that InkMe, the application that I suggested, a while back, be an incubator project. And if that were to happen, then whatever the incubator team would be, they would have to nominate one member of that team to serve as a director in the RChain Co-op. And this is because I believe that there should be, a kind of ownership and direction in the co-op that comes directly from the incubator. So that's another process by which we get directors into the co-op. So, any other thoughts?
I would assume there's, going to be co-op projects that should also pony up a director, perhaps.
Well, there are going to be an initial set of co-op directors, right? And But what I'm saying is, as people come into the incubator, they have a reason to have a stake.
Yeah, definitely want to align interests so that the the directors are very committed to the success of RChain.
Yeah,
absolutely. And coming from the incubator or completely independent projects, whatever. So let's make sure they're very well aligned. I think also we need a variety of talents as directors. Technology people, business people, biz dev people, finance, legal people. But we want directors, especially in this initial group, to be fairly active, to commit time to making this successful, as opposed to a passive board of directors, that meet once a quarter. This has to be much more active.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just suggesting that you don't want to be heavy on the incubator side. You want to have balance with the membership-driven nature of a co-op, and the members having the majority control. Now, of course, the incubator projects will be members also.
Right.
You sort of want to employ some democratic principles there.
Agreed. No, that's a fair point. Absolutely.
Right. The way I'm viewing members is they're individuals, or at least one entity that, let's say you have a large company being eventually represented that spins out of the incubator or independently. Still, they're the same as an individual community member that happens to, buy into the membership. So there's just one class of membership, is how I see it.
Yes. Hey, Evan just joined us. Hey, Evan, thanks for joining. Sorry for the short notice. We have been running stand up at the same time for the last 2 years, but I do understand that it's easy to get confused about this. So thank you for joining, and I'm really excited to have you on board as counsel for RChain Co-op.
Yeah, good to be here.
And with that, you guys can all hang out and keep talking. I have to jump over to Dev Stand Up, and I just want to say I'm just amazed by all of the engagement. Right, already we're now at parity with the size of the scenario organization when I left it, and so that's just remarkable. In 2 weeks, we've put together so much, and I think that we'll continue to have that kind of productivity and more. And so I'm really excited about this project. Okay, guys, I'm jumping over to Dev Stand Up. One thing to think about is I've been thinking of having Dev Stand Up be open to others, but with the thought that in order to facilitate technical conversation, you only get the feather to talk if you are an active committer. And if you're not an active committer, you're invited to listen, but only listen. So give that a thought, think about it, and express your opinions in the Slack channel. And with that, I will see you guys next week. Ciao, ciao.